Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us both in person and online. I know it's about 4:01 right now and the meeting starts at 4, but we're going to give it just a couple more minutes in case there's any late joiners that want to have a few more minutes to hop on. Thank you for the patience. Alrighty, how's that on the mic there, Marie? Is that okay? Mic check. Alrighty, perfect. I think we're all set to begin here. First of all, good afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone who has taken the time to join us today, both in person and virtually through our online portal. The Township Muskoka Lakes is pleased to be able to present the public information session and to provide details regarding our sewage system maintenance inspection program. Maria, if you could toss up the first slide for our presentation, that would be fantastic. Okay, thanks everyone's patience viewing online there. Sorry about that. Today's session is being live streamed and recorded on the Township of Muskoka Lakes website and YouTube channel. By participating in the open public information session, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded and posted online. Before we start into the presentation, I would like to take an important moment to read the Township of Muskoka Lakes Land Acknowledgement Statement. We want to acknowledge that we are on lands traditionally occupied by Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have cared for this territory for the benefit of future generations, and their stewardship through the ages is recognized. My name is Matthew Irving. I'm the Township's Sewage System Maintenance Inspection Program Administrator. For the presentation today, I will start with a very high-level overview and some policy topics regarding the actual maintenance inspection program itself. After that, staff are joining us today from Envision. They will kind of walk through the actual process of the kind of boots on the ground inspection process. And at the end, we will conclude with a question and answer session. Before we dive into it, I'll just do a couple of real quick introductions. To my right, we have Nick Snyder. Nick Snyder is the chief building official for the township. Nick, just for the benefit of viewers viewing online and in person, if you don't mind addressing the crowd, or a brief wave if you could. Thank you, sir. Also joining us today, we have representatives from Envision Consultants Limited. To my left, we have Paisley McDowell. Paisley is the project manager of rural servicing with Envision. Likewise, Paisley, if you don't mind, just a quick wave. And to the left of Paisley, we also have Victoria Lucas joining us. Victoria is the project coordinator of rural servicing with Envision. Just to provide a bit of background, last year in 2023, the township updated and enhanced its sewage system maintenance inspection policy to include a phase 2 inspection component for high-risk sewage systems. Recognizing the significant workload required to complete phase 2 maintenance inspections, the township did run a RFP, or a request for proposal competition, in order to attract a qualified external partner to assist with the large volume of seasonal sewage system inspections. As a result, Envision Consultants were the successful party from the competition, and as such are now partnered with the township to help complete phase 2 maintenance inspections. The purpose of the information session today is to dive a little bit deeper into those phase 2s, what they are exactly and what is entailed. This slide that you're seeing on the screen has been included just as a kind of quick overview of agenda items that we're going to hopefully cover off today. As I said, I'll begin with kind of a policy overview of the inspection program. Once I'm done, I'll pass off the reins to our partners at Envision, and they'll go through some of the logistics of those other items on there, scheduling process for arranging an inspection, how to prepare for a scheduled phase 2 inspection, what to expect from a phase 2 maintenance inspection, the type of documentation that you will receive once the inspection is done, as well as general septic care and best practice information. Finally, once we've run through those items, we'll conclude with a question and answer. If there's any questions, both in person or for the folks joining us online, that will be the opportunity to go over those questions. And because this session is a hybrid format, we anticipate questions from participants attending both in person and online over Zoom. Therefore, during the question and answer period, we will alternate back and forth between in-person and online questions. For those attending in person, if and when you have a question, please do attend to the podium at the end. There's a toggle slide on the microphone. If you press it to the on position, you can then ask your question. And similarly, for those joining us via Zoom, at the end, please do raise your virtual hand to signal that you have a question and would like to speak. From there, Maria will promote you to a panelist, and at that point, you'll be able to speak and ask a question. If possible, please turn your camera on and do be sure to unmute yourself when asking a question. Again, we'll hold all questions to the end, and I'll repeat those instructions at that point. Maria, if you don't mind taking us to the next slide, please, and thank you. The Township Muskoka Lakes Building Department has operated a sewage system maintenance inspection program since the year 2000. The purpose of the program is to identify and inspect on-site sewage systems, which may pose an elevated risk of contamination to the environment through the release of untreated or improperly treated wastewater. As a fundamental guiding pillar of the inspection program, it exists to protect and preserve the area's natural environment. It is a proactive program designed to provide education on on-site sewage care, as well as maintenance. It also has the purpose of locating and remedying situations where a sewage system may be failing. The reality is that there are failing sewage systems out there that are perhaps not being corrected in a timely or effective manner. And through the maintenance inspection program, it is possible to locate those systems and ensure that appropriate actions are taken. It's also worth noting that the municipality is responsible for the administration and enforcement of the building code as it relates to on-site sewage systems, which have a daily design flow of 10,000 liters per day or less. As such, the municipality is most often involved with residential, some commercial, some light industrial properties, where the production of domestic grade sewage is less than 10,000 liters per day. Where a property generates more than 10,000 liters per day of sewage, the approval, inspection, and enforcement duties would become the responsibility of the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation, and Parks. Just to provide a couple of examples relevant to our area, larger campgrounds or resort-type properties generating large amounts of sewage in excess of 10,000 liters a day would not be inspected under this municipal maintenance inspection program, but would instead fall under the jurisdiction and purview of the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation, and Parks. Maria, if you don't mind, one more slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So under the maintenance inspection program, we have phase 1 and phase 2 maintenance inspections, either of which may be required for an on-site sewage system. Today's presentation is primarily focused on the latter, being phase 2 inspections and properties containing sewage systems which have been classified as high risk. Regardless of the type of inspection, either a phase 1 or a phase 2, they both begin with the same step, and that is a review of documentation to determine considerations such as age of the system, construction, location of the system. Based on criteria, the on-site sewage system will then be assigned a risk classification rating, which will range between low to medium or high. I'll go over that risk classification criteria in a couple minutes on the next slide. But first, the risk classification assigned to the sewage system will directly determine the type of follow-up that is required. So to give an example, a medium risk system will undergo a phase 1 inspection. By contrast, a system that has been deemed to be high risk will require a phase 2 inspection. And to provide a bit of context, for property owners that have held property in Muskoka Lakes for many years, there's a good chance you're familiar with our phase 1 inspections. These are no-cost inspections completed by seasonal township staff. Muskoka Lakes has been performing this type of phase 1 inspection since the year 2000 and continues to do so. These inspections are largely sensory in nature. In other words, sight, touch, smell, hopefully never taste. For instance, inspectors will be looking for visual sources of concern. A good example might be pooling water or a wet area on top of a leaching bed in the middle of summer during a dry, hot spell. Something like that would certainly warrant further investigation. The inspector doing that inspection would be questioning, why is there a puddle here? We know that effluent should travel down vertically and laterally through the effective treatment area of the bed, not up to the surface. So that would be a visual cue and potentially warrant some further investigation to figure out the source of that ponding. Inspector would be asking, is there damage to the bed? Is there oversaturation causing mounding or breakout? These visual clues will help the inspector determine what the next steps might be in terms of further investigation. Keeping with the sensory phase 1 inspections, unpleasant odors of sewage systems are another sensory clue that can prompt further investigation. Another very common occurrence that we come across are broken, cracked, damaged, or even missing tank lids. This kind of deficiency can be twofold. On the one hand, most septic systems operate in an anaerobic environment where bacteria in there thrives in an oxygen-free environment. So if the tank lid is, missing or significantly damaged, that can hinder the actual treatment of the sewage within the tank. There's also the second concern about missing damaged tank lids with regards to small children or pets potentially being able to fall into the system itself. These are all items that can be easily identified without causing too much disturbance to the soil or too much of an invasive investigation. Again, phase 1, largely sensory observations. Moving on to phase 2 inspections, all of those sensory clues would again be looked for. However, a phase 2 inspection further involves a more invasive assessment of a sewage system. This will generally include, for starters, an examination of the tank itself and how sanitary sewage entering the tank is settling. For instance, within a standard septic tank, there will generally be 3 levels. Your top layer will be things that float, and that's your scum layer. This is generally your fats, oils, greases, sometimes things that got flushed or went down the sink that shouldn't have. Dental floss will become part of that scum layer. In the middle, you'll have kind of your murky water, which occupies the majority of the tank, and this is largely a liquid type fluid in the middle. And on the bottom, you'll have everything that sinks, and that's your sludge layer. So as part of a phase 2 inspection, something that'll be done is measuring of those 3 components within the system as a building code requirement. When the combined total of scum, again, that's the floating layer, and sludge, that's everything that sinks to the bottom, occupy more than 1/3 of the working capacity of your tank, it is time to have it pumped. In addition, phase 2 inspections will include checking the condition of the inlet and outlet baffles, also checking the effluent filter if installed. It's important to note not every tank is going to have an effluent filter. They were not mandatory until, I believe, after 2007. Inspectors will also be looking to confirm the condition of the tank. Is there cracking? Is there spalling? Is there significant corrosion? Even the best made concrete tanks, and I will just pick on concrete tanks as an example here, even the best made tanks are susceptible to corrosive gases that accumulate within the airspace of the septic tank, and that can cause the concrete to corrode over time. Generally with newer concrete tanks, you'll have plastic lids and risers, but certainly older tanks will have concrete lids, concrete baffles, concrete partitions. All of those elements are susceptible to corrosion and degradation over time due to the buildup of corrosive gases within the limited airspace of a septic tank. Just to a couple other things, and I won't touch upon all of them because I know our partners at Envision will be going through this in detail a little bit later, but certainly just to provide a little bit of a flair of some of the other gambit of testing that occurs for a phase 2 inspection. Older systems will require a hydraulic loading test. This is basically a test designed to mimic peak use of the sewage system or a situation where there's going to be significant amount of sanitary sewage entering the system over a relatively short or limited time period. I know of a couple of inspectors that like to refer to this simulated test as the morning rush. Think of it as a morning when someone may be using a shower, someone else is doing dishes, and perhaps a third person is brushing their teeth, using a bathroom, generally getting ready for the day. In essence, there's a lot of sanitary sewage entering the system over a relatively short period of time. So the hydraulic loading test is intended to mimic this peak use or morning rush where a large volume of sewage is entering the tank over a short period of time. Inspectors will be looking to see are levels in the tank staying constant? Is it backing up towards the residence? They'll also be looking at the leaching bed itself. Is water pooling on the surface? We just essentially want to make sure that the nuts and bolts of the sewage system are working and that effluent is traveling through the system as it should and as it is designed. Just before I proceed to the next slide, I just want to kind of, bring it back full circle. I know we're kind of text heavy on this one, but was hoping just to kind of differentiate between a phase 1 and a phase 2. Again, phase 1, almost exclusively sensory, whereas a phase 2 is a more in-depth analysis of the inner workings of the system itself. Anne Marie, if you could go to the next slide, please, and thank you. I'll similarly apologize. I know this one is a bit on the text heavy side. However, it certainly has some information that is of interest. Now that we know a bit about a phase 1 inspection in comparison to a phase 2 inspection, it is appropriate to quickly go over that risk classification criteria that you are now seeing on the screen. This criteria comes directly from the township's sewage system maintenance inspection policy. If you're joining us today, either in person or on Zoom, there is a very good chance that you receive notification that your sewage system has been deemed high risk and requires a phase 2 inspection. So just to go through that high risk classification that you see on the screen, this will be any system without any record on file, any sewage system utilizing a steel tank or tanks, any system greater than 30 years old, or any system greater than 10 years old and installed on a property abutting a water body where a water quality indicator has been confirmed in accordance with the policies of the Muskoka official plan. Some of those items are relatively straightforward. However, there are a few worth going over one by one. First one I'd like to point out is the point about steel tanks. Certainly steel tanks are prone to corrode through and rot over time, especially when buried in soil. Rotten tanks pose an environmental concern in potentially allowing untreated sewage to seep out through corroded holes, corroded bottoms, corroded sidewalls. So there's certainly that environmental aspect of older steel tanks. There's also a significant safety concern for anybody walking, working, generally moving about on or near a steel septic tank. Certainly there are stories of people falling into steel septic tanks simply by stepping on them and the structure collapsing. So when we come across those, we certainly like to ensure that the structural integrity of the steel tanks is acceptable. Another item on that high risk list that I would like to draw attention to is for sewage systems greater than 10 years old and installed on a property abutting a water body where a water quality indicator has been confirmed. For this year's inspection area, that would apply to 3 Mile Lake, where long-term phosphorus concentrations and documented occurrences of blue-green algal blooms have been identified, within the district of Muskoka's official plan. The rationale for this elevated level of protection, requiring the phase 2 inspection at 10 years and older rather than 30 years and older, as is the case on some other lakes, is to add an extra safeguard towards protecting water bodies which are already known to be sensitive. And one last item that I just want to address before we move on would be with regards to the age of a system. Just to use a conventional septic system as an example, to simplify the nuts and bolts down, there is essentially 2 main components, being the tank and the dispersal field. Age is in consideration of both of those components. So as an example, let's say a septic tank has been replaced under a building permit and a final issued within the last 5 years. However, the leaching bed itself is 35 years old and has not been replaced. In a case such as that, the system would be classified as a whole, and because the bed is meeting the high risk criteria, the system in its entirety would need to be inspected as part of a phase 2 inspection. Just for a quick moment, I'm going to ask that Maria jump ahead one slide on the presentation and bring up our colorful map. Perfect, thank you. On the left side of the screen, we see a map of the township, which has been divided into 5 geographic zones. These zones were drawn based on municipal roll numbers and an approximately equal number of developed properties. Zone 1, being the 2024 inspection area, is the area colored dark purple, and this is where phase 2 inspections are occurring this year. Several months ago, a document review of properties within the purple zone, or zone 1, was completed to compare sewage system records with the high risk criteria that we just looked at on the previous slide. Maria, if you don't mind taking us back one slide to slide 5 and bringing that criteria back up, that would be great. Thank you. So from the document review in the zone 1 geographic area that we just looked at, located in the northeast area of the township, staff identified 775 properties as meeting the high-risk criteria and including sewage systems defined as high risk within the policy. Following that document review and identification of those high-risk sewage systems, notice was then mailed out to all affected property owners in Zone 1, advising that a Phase 2 sewage system inspection would be required this summer. And as such, that is by and large what has got us here today and the purpose for this public information session to hopefully answer any questions, provide information about the high-risk classification, how we got here, and to provide kind of next steps on what to inspect as our inspections go into full swing. And just while we have that slide up there, it's important to note we see the moderate risk classification as well. And as noted earlier, those Phase 1 sensory inspections have been occurring for the past 24 years and will certainly continue going forward. And those will be happening kind of in unison this year in the same general geographic area as our Phase 2 inspections. So it's quite possible you may have a neighbor undergoing a Phase 1 inspection while you're having a Phase 2 inspection, or vice versa. And again, the reason for that all boils down to the risk classification you're seeing on there: age, construction. Maria, if you don't mind proceeding one slide, bring up our map one more time before we pass by it. Worth noting that I forgot to mention when we were here the first time, as you can see on there with the 5 geographic zones, it proceeds in a clockwise manner. So 2024, 2025, and so on, taking us, past 2028. And then the 5-year reinspection will begin again in 2029 in the same affected purple area that we're seeing. So it is a 5-year reoccurring Phase 2 inspection program. And if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this is the last slide for me. Just before I pass the presentation off to our partners at Envision, I wanted to highlight some of the legal requirements of both the municipality and also individual property owners with regards to the sewage system operation and maintenance. The Building Code Act 1992 is the legislative framework governing construction, renovation, and change of use in Ontario. The Ontario Building Code is the regulation under the Building Code Act. Worth noting, Section 8.9 of the Ontario Building Code speaks directly to operation and maintenance requirements for all on-site sewage systems. Section 8.9 provides that every sewage system shall be operated and maintained so that the sewage system or any part of it shall not emit, discharge, or deposit sanitary sewage or effluent, except where specifically designed or intended, as per design and approval. Section 8.9 goes on to further state that every sewage system shall be operated in accordance with the basis on which the construction and use of the system was approved or required under the Act or predecessor legislation, and that all components of the sewage system shall function in their intended manner. That last statement is particularly important, noting that all components of the sewage system shall function in their intended manner. On-site sewage systems are hardworking systems that perform an essential function and allow us to enjoy our property. However, sometimes there can be a tendency to install a system and forget about it, especially when the system is partially or completely buried. As a result, a big benefit of the reinspection program is not only locating potential sources of environmental contamination, but also education, getting property owners familiar with where their tanks are located, when they should be pumping them, where their drain fields are located. Drain fields are expensive to replace, so simple maintenance and awareness goes a long way. Maintaining healthy grass cover and removing deep rooting plants can go a long way to preventing system failure and saving you large expenses. Fast-growing plants such as raspberry bushes or invasive Japanese knotweed can quickly spread roots into distribution piping, causing a system to plug and fail. Similarly, water-loving trees with expansive root systems such as silver maple and willows can quickly destroy a leaching bed. And on that note, I am going to pass the presentation over to Paisley with Envision.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Maria. So I'm going to walk through kind of the point that Envision has taken over the property. So at this point, homeowners would have received a letter from the township. They're going to let you know you were part of the high risk program and what was to come. So then from here forward, we have that list of properties, and now Envision will be the one who sends out the next round of letters or email, depending on what information you potentially passed along to Matt following that first letter. So the process is that we will issue kind of a program information letter. It's kind of a quick double-sided piece of paper that's going to try to give you as much of the key information as possible and inform you of when your inspection has been booked, and then provide you the location of the municipality's sewage inspection program website so that you can gather more information, and then our team's contact information, email and phone number, so that you can directly correspond with our team if you have any questions. So we issue these letters out generally 4 to 6 weeks before your assigned inspection. So if you haven't received it yet, it might just mean that you haven't been booked in quite yet, and you may be in July or August or September. We have pictures with each slide, so I'm just going to take a few moments on each slide to kind of talk about what we're looking at so that we ensure that everyone kind of gets a little bit of education here if you're not sure, and maybe helps you when you're going to start digging for your system. So in this case, this would be what would be a standard septic tank. So we have 2 lids. They have the plastic lids that Matt mentioned before. So those are often those green domes that you see. In this case, we're highlighting this property specifically because it is under a deck. So you need to have access to your septic tank, not only for this inspection, but for future pump outs. If you have an effluent filter, that should be cleaned at a higher frequency, then you likely want to dig 2 holes in your ground or rip up deck planks. So if you did receive the letter, or as we get a few more slides in, you'll see that we make a comment about the kind of vertical separation or vertical clearance that we need above a tank. And that's in order for us to do that kind of solid measurement that Matt mentioned. So those 3 layers, in order for us to assess that, we need to put a clear tube down into the tank to get essentially a core sample to view that. And that means that we need to have a pole that's as deep as your tank that we can put down in. So if you have a deck that's above your septic tank, it's difficult for us to crawl under there and still complete the inspection. So in this case, the deck is low, it's right at the tank. These are great hatches. If you happen to have a deck that gives you maybe a little bit of crawl space, keep in mind that that vertical clearance is still required, and you may ultimately still need to end up pulling up a few planks or potentially installing hatches like this. And because there happened to be a hose in this picture, I will also reference that a water supply would be required if we have to do that hydraulic test. So Matt kind of alluded to it, but generally older systems or systems that don't have any sort of permits or approvals would need that. And we need to have running water to simulate that morning rush. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point in the process, you have received your letter. It would have provided key information, and it would have said your inspection has been booked for this date and this time window. It'll provide this contact information, so our email and our phone number, and it will say if you would like to rebook, or if you just have questions, you can contact us. So for rebooking, we ask that you provide us at least 2 business days notice, but of course, the most notice you can give, the best. We'll note that properties have been assigned based on their geographic location. So if you are having an inspection that day, it's likely that the neighbors immediately around you who also are part of the high risk category are also having an inspection that same day. Generally, inspections are taking place between May, they started today, and going until about October. Ultimately, it's going to depend on the weather. We can no longer inspect once it's snow. So we generally say October in there. And then mostly Monday to Friday. However, we do understand these are sometimes seasonal properties. Sometimes homeowners are only here on a weekend and they may want to be present. So we do have after hour appointments kind of into the evening, first thing in the morning, or Saturday appointments. You won't be assigned one of those likely. You would need to contact us to kind of request some of those less common timeframes, and then we'll do our best to help find a time slot. We'll note that some properties have restricted access. So on your letter, there should be a little statement that says the property access is, and it'll probably say driving vehicle access, or it might say by boat for water access only. And then we have a little sentence underneath that says, if this is not correct, please let us know. So that information is what we have from the township, and we're mostly identifying the properties that we need to have a boat to access. All of the boat-only properties are booked within a certain time frame. There's, of course, logistics of accessing properties by boat. So it is a little bit more difficult for us to change around those appointment days. So when those letters do come out, we have not assigned any water access only yet this year, but they will be coming throughout the summer. When that happens, just please be aware that we have limited kind of rescheduling options, and knowing that your neighbors are also going to be in the same time frame, we just ask that you maybe try to speak with a neighbor or your lake association to see if you can find a way to still accommodate the inspection. And if there are other access restrictions, maybe you have to walk through a trail or a certain area, then please notify of us that ahead of time. And looking at this picture, so this is going to be standard concrete tank. Both lids are exposed here. You'll see that the lids are kind of on the edges of the tank. So a lot of people think that the lids are going to be towards the middle, but the point of the lids is to let you see both of the pipes. So the pipe coming into the tank and the pipe leaving. So your lids are actually going to be on kind of that outer edge wall. Most tanks will have two. We do need to see both of those lids. In this case, this homeowner exposed the entire top of tank, which is great for pictures like this. However, we don't need you to dig up that much of your lawn. We only need to see and be able to remove the actual lid. If your tank is deep, we ask that you don't make a big deep trench, because it is hard to lift heavy lids up straight in that whole area. If possible, give a little bit of extra space so that it doesn't have to come straight up and it can kind of come up on an angle, just to help everyone's backs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how to prepare for an inspection. We've alluded to a little bit of this, and these are all of the point form notes that are on the letter, but we'll go through them. So we are encouraging that there be an owner or an agent of the owner present for the inspection. However, it is not required. That being said, the next question is that, or the next point is that we will have questions for you during the inspection that we may not know in advance. And there may be some paperwork that we're asking to see. So if you know that you will not be there, or you cannot ask a neighbor or someone else to be there on your behalf, we request that you contact us ahead of time, let us know that, and we will collect that information in advance. And whether it's verbally, or we may ask you to email us a piece of paper. A big part of being there is that we get to talk about your system with you. So we welcome you to be present for the entirety of the inspection. We can walk you through the process, show you exactly what we're looking at, how we're completing the inspection. Not only are you learning maybe where your system is, how it's functioning, but we're going to talk about information like what to look for if you were to open up your lids yourself, or maybe next time you have a pump out, come out and see the pumper and look at your tank and look for some of these same signs that will kind of help you do your own preventative inspections. So the last point in here was to gather documentation. So some of the documentation that we would be seeking is your most recent pump out receipt. And then if you have any diagrams or septic records or permits, anything that the township has, they have passed over to us. So we have kind of whatever we reasonably can. However, it's not going to be everything necessarily. So if you know that you have some old records, it doesn't hurt to send them to us ahead of time or have it ready there. We will take a picture during the inspection, and it may be a duplicate of what we have, but it may be information that we don't have. And for this picture, we are looking at the outlet side of the tank. And we know that because we can see that little blue funny shaped thing in the pipe. So what we're actually looking at is the outlet pipe, and the vertical part where the blue thing is sticking in is called your baffle. It's to help ensure that solids are not going to exit through that outlet pipe. And that blue thing is an effluent filter. So those filters, as Matt said, have been in systems generally since about 06, 07. They are intended to help collect some of those solids to protect your leaching bed, which is ultimately the more expensive component of the system. So if you have an effluent filter, it should be cleaned. The frequency of that is a little bit case by case. We do recommend you include it in your spring and fall cleanup. That's kind of a good place to start. Every 6 months is maybe not the frequency that you want to be reaching down into your septic tank and rinsing something off. So we kind of recommend you start there. And when you go to do it at your second or your first 6 month increment, if you see that the filter is fairly clean, maybe you can wait and do it once a year and kind of over time start to judge that yourself. Next slide, please. So continuing on how to prepare for the inspection, because this is a phase 2 inspection, so we are, let's call it a more intrusive inspection. That does mean that we need to see inside of all of the tankage on the property. We have been talking a lot about septic tanks. However, a lot of sewage systems may have a pump tank. As long as the pump is outside of the building, so it may be before your septic tank or after your septic tank, we would like to be seeing that pump as well as part of the inspection, both for condition of tank, but function of pump. And then you may have something called a distribution box, which would be how you distribute sewage throughout your leaching bed. You may not know that you have one. You may only know that you have a distribution box if you have a permit for that property and it notes that. If you do have a distribution box and you can see that on your permits, that's another small tank, but a tank that we would again like to be seeing. Just noting that not everyone will have that component, nor would everyone necessarily have a pump tank. You can generally assess if you have a pump tank if it doesn't look like sewage can roll down to its dispersal location. So if you know that your tank or your bed is up on a hill compared to where your primary dwelling is, it needs to be pumped to get there. If you can kind of follow the line from your building through the components of the system and it seems to kind of be going downhill or relatively flat, you may not have a pump on that system. So for the actual explosion of the system, we are asking that all tanks are unearthed and ready to be removed. If you have not removed your septic tank lids in a long time, let's say more than 5 years, they may be a little bit stuck and it may take a little bit of time to wiggle that lid free. If you know that you're in that situation, we ask that you try to do some of that wiggling before we show up so that we're not fighting with it too much with you at the time. We don't want you to leave tank lids unattended. So if you actually dig them up and remove the lid, that's great and we appreciate it very much, but don't leave an open hole for very long. If you know that we're coming within the next few hours, that might be suitable, but we ask that you not remove the lid on a Sunday and you leave the area and your inspection isn't until a Wednesday. Not only do we want people potentially coming onto your property and falling in a tank, or kids or animals or rodents, rain, if you get heavy rainfall, we don't want an easy access location to that tank. So in this picture, we are showing a class 4 septic tank lid, so the standard concrete lid. However, you'll notice that there's a pipe drilled right through it. That's called an access port. They are smaller, generally kind of 4-inch diameter pipes. They are typically used in the case of a holding tank. Your holding tank just holds sewage and then it gets pumped out. So that pumping out frequency can be on the time frame of months rather than the standard year time frame that you would be talking about for a septic tank. So not everyone wants to dig up their tanks or even remove the lids at a frequency of every few months. So sometimes access ports get installed and it allows the pumper just to drop the hose directly into that port. We have seen, and this would be an example of where a class 4 system has an access port attached to it. However, if you were to try to look down that tube, you can imagine that we see virtually nothing. That means we cannot complete an inspection. So if you have an access port and you have a class 4 system, so a septic tank and a leaching bed, we ask that you dig down right along the access port, because it's likely going to be installed directly on your lid like this picture shows. And you should be able to find a lid at that base of that pipe that hopefully will be able to be removed. At minimum, if you dig down, we will be able to see the material of the tank by looking at that lid. And then I mentioned the vertical clearance ahead of time. So we'll just note that we say it's 2.5 meters or 8 feet. That is the height of the rod that we are putting into the septic tanks. So we are seeking for that distance to be provided above the lid so that we can complete that test. Next slide, please. So the final slide on preparing for an inspection. We are looking to evaluate septic tanks, how they operate. And if your tank has just been pumped, we're looking at an empty tank, and that's not really telling us how the system is operating. So in the letter, we would be requesting that you do not pump your septic tank immediately before the scheduled inspection. That being said, if there is any sort of environmental or human health concern, absolutely pump out your tank. If it is under normal operating conditions and you are intending on pumping it out, or maybe you're not, either way, we just ask that you ensure that your tank is back to operating liquid level, which means the content in the tank, the liquid is going to fill back up in line with generally both your inlet and outlet pipes, which we put in an estimate of 4 weeks. It's very variable depending on each property. If you know that you live there full time and you're fully using your system, you don't need 4 weeks to bring that tank back up to its full capacity. But particularly for a seasonal property or maybe just weekend usage, 4 weeks is a pretty safe value that we've put in here. And then we'll flag back to the running water. So a hose may be required if we have to do our hydraulic test. A hose would be required to bring towards a septic tank. And then we'll note this picture. So as surprising as it may seem, this is the opening to a septic tank. And this homeowner had compiled some logs and kind of wedged it into the opening and put a tarp over top of it and called that their septic tank lid after the lid had previously corroded due to the gases that Matt had mentioned. It happens, but there are safe ways to replace your lid, and that may mean getting a new concrete lid. However, the easiest answer is likely to put those green risers, those green domes onto the tank. They're a lot lighter. They don't need to be specifically customized to your tank, depending on what type of tank you have. And then it provides you easier access. It is in the code now that lids are to have the risers and that they are to be within 30 centimeters of ground surface. You are welcome to have the risers be at ground surface and you no longer have to do any digging. However, if you don't want to look at the green lids, you can put them underground just enough so that you can grow a little bit of grass or some clover on top of them. Maybe put 2 little rocks so you know where those locations are in the future. And then you don't have to worry about looking at them, and you don't have to dig potentially to 1 meter to access your tank, because that is the maximum depth of a standard septic tank. Next slide, please. So now we'll go to what to expect during an inspection. So upon arrival, the inspector will meet with the homeowner or representative potentially to discuss system characteristics. If it's not already dug and apparent in our walk between the driveway and the door, we may ask where the system is located, ask how many systems are on the property. This is where we will collect information like how many bedrooms are in the dwelling, and that would include all dwellings on the property. So if you have a boathouse or a bunkie, we would also ask for the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. And if you know it, even just an approximation, the square footage of the building. We would also ask questions like maintenance. So when was that last pump out? Do you have that receipt? And then what is your typical pump out frequency? So just for us to know that you pumped it out 6 months ago doesn't necessarily help us or help you in our conversations to know if you're at an appropriate frequency, because we don't know if it's been 2 years or 20 years prior to that pump out. We will take GPS locations of the sewage components and if you have a drinking water well. And then just as a general note, the inspections will take approximately an hour. It is going to depend on what components are present, kind of what we're finding, if we have to do that hydraulic test that we've referenced. If it's a newer system, we won't be doing that test, and therefore we don't need the time that it takes to do it. And then just looking at this picture, so this is a tank. If you can kind of see down into the darkness of the bottom of the hole, you can actually see an opening. That's the septic tank. The lid has been moved off to the side, so we are looking at the sewage in the tank. You can see a little bright kind of half circle around a tree root. That is a little bit of the metal baffle, so it's around one of the pipes that you can see. So this tree root and this tree has been growing since this system was installed. And we're using this picture just to show you how large and encompassing tree roots can become. I think it's maybe a little bit more common knowledge that trees shouldn't be growing over top of leaching beds for the same reason. Roots get into the pipes. You've got pipes filled with nutrient-rich water. Roots are very tiny. They can find their way up and in and completely clog the pipe. But similarly, trees will seek septic tanks as well. So we also would recommend that you don't have trees immediately adjacent or on top of your septic tanks. They're adding weight and roots may be going down. These little roots will start finding the way between the tank lid cracks, and they can start breaking apart the lids, making that space larger and larger. And it's fairly common for us to see roots that are coming in along the inlet and outlet pipes. So again, you've got trees or woody vegetation that is near the tank. They find a pipe and they start traveling down on the outside of the pipe, and they send their little thin roots through that little space that's around the pipe, and they get into your tank. Next slide, please. So now we're going to break down the inspection a little bit more into the various components. So we're calling this a tank inspection. For the most part, this is your septic tank inspection. However, some similar information would be collected if we're talking about a pump tank or potentially a distribution box. So we would be inspecting the tank for its condition. So that could be the state, the type of material, and then the condition of that material. That would include the lids. We're referencing the sludge and scum layer depth. So you can actually see that clear tube in this picture. That's the tube that will be going down into your tank. It allows us to pull it up, just like you can see here, to see a profile. And then we do release that sewage safely back into the tank. So we are not taking your sewage or relocating it anywhere else. the inspector is going to document components like effluent filters, inlet and outlet pipe baffles, and then conditions around those, and then talk about maintenance practices or potentially recommendations of how you could improve operation and maintenance or kind of the condition of some of those pieces. Next slide, please. So moving on to the leaching bed inspection. This is one where a leaching bed is buried. It's not something that we necessarily want to be digging up. We only want to be exposing leaching bed if we find indications that there are issues. So for the most part, a leaching bed inspection is a lot more, let's say, a superficial or sensory, pulling the words that we had before. That being said, the tank, seeing inside the tank provides us a lot of information on how the leaching bed is functioning based on the liquid levels in the tank. So we still do gain some knowledge in that sense. But looking at the leaching bed itself, our inspector would be walking the area, looking for the types of vegetation that's growing, looking for any structures that could be on top of the leaching bed, or indications that vehicles are either parked there at the time or have been in the past, or drive over top of the leaching bed. Anything that's got kind of excessive weight or limits aeration can all negatively impact the leaching bed. So those are kind of the key things that we're looking for. And then wet and spongy areas would be a sign that the system is no longer functioning as it should be. There really shouldn't be a time where your leaching bed is saturated and wet or has any sort of sewage odors. In this picture, as much as it doesn't look like it, this is their leaching bed. It is very much under their driveway. And this led to us seeing signs that the leaching bed was not able to disperse all of the sewage because the sewage was backing up into the septic tank. Next slide, please. So we'll go into a little bit of the additional testing. So just to provide a frame of reference of which systems would require the two types of testing that we mentioned here. So the first one is that hydraulic test, that morning rush. These are going to be on gravity-fed systems, so systems without pumps that are greater than 25 years old, that have a certificate of approval only or no permits found at all. So to do the test, we will require running water, and we will be taking a hose and putting it, just kind of suspending it right above the liquid level in the outlet chamber of the tank. So we are looking at not the side that generally accumulates with solids. We're looking at the side that's a little bit more liquid based in a normal operating system. And we will be kind of calculating the volume of water that's coming through that system, and then timing it and evaluating how the system reacts both during the running water stage and in the time after. So we're looking to see, do your tank levels rise? Therefore, maybe the leaching bed is not able to disperse that amount of liquid. And then if it did rise, is it able to drop back down in a, let's say, acceptable amount of time? So if it is able to eventually drain, that's, maybe a sign that your system isn't at its peak operation. However, it is still able to accommodate that morning rush type flow. So that may be a conversation with the homeowner to say, maybe be cognizant about the amount of people that are at the property and how much flow is being used at any given time. Try to spread that out and maybe start preparing for a future replacement of this system. So then we'll look at the kind of soil item, which we haven't addressed yet in this presentation. So for systems without any permits found, the intention is to try to collect some of that information that would or should have been on that permit. And one of the main pieces of information when designing a sewage system is going to be the soil conditions. Are you in a sandy area and therefore sewage is going to disperse fairly readily, or are you in a very clay, compact soil area where you get a lot of ponding, it's really wet, and sewage is not going to disperse quickly. So in a system where there's no permits found, we will be hand augering. So just a 2-inch auger going down by hand to evaluate what soil type is within the leaching bed and immediately outside of the leaching bed, just so that we can document that information. And then looking at this picture, this is a outlet baffle. So the good thing about this outlet pipe might be hard to tell, but the sewage is sitting right at the base of the pipe. So that is at the operating level of the tank. That means whenever you flush a toilet or you run a sink, anything, that amount of volume is going to come into the tank. It's going to enter your inlet side. It's going to enter that liquid section that Matt mentioned. It's going to transfer over to your outlet side, and then it's going to kind of push that same amount out of your outlet pipe, which means that pipe is sitting at its kind of static state at the base of the pipe. When we see liquid levels that's too low, that means sewage is getting out some other way, not out of its intended pipe. And liquid levels that are too high means that sewage is not able to get out of the pipe in the way that it should be. So that's going to be one of the key indicators. But another reason why this picture was selected is this baffle is not in good condition. So what should be concrete all the way up to the top, and you can see a nice box. At this point, you can just see broken off pieces of concrete and some rusty metal, which was previously the support system to that baffle. So in this case, the gases have corroded this baffle. And the primary purpose of your outlet baffle is to ensure that any solids that find themselves in the second chamber don't just have an easy path to float along the top of the liquid and go right out your pipe and clog your pipes. So if you have a baffle there, they get stopped, and the liquid section needs to come up the bottom of the baffle as intended. So when you have a baffle like this that's kind of right at that liquid level, you are in a situation where solids can start exiting out of that pipe and clogging your bed. So this would be a time where you want to replace your outlet baffle, and that could be a time where you want to put a PVC-T baffle and put in an effluent filter. Next slide, please. So post-inspection documentation. So during the inspection, assuming that someone is present, the inspector will be walking you through the inspection, what they're looking at, kind of a lot of the information that we've talked about, but what are they seeing specifically for your system, and what are some potential recommendations? And then that will be compiled into an inspection report. So that will document all of the observations that we saw and provide recommendations if there are any. If there were any sort of maintenance or operation actions that were required to be taken, those next steps will be outlined. And then we're just noting that it depends on kind of what deficiencies were observed, but there may need to be a post-remedial inspection, which would mean that we are coming back out, or someone is coming back out to look to make sure that the system is now functioning now that a certain component has been corrected or fixed or investigated. And then this picture is just a nice septic tank, 2 lids opened. Again, you don't need to expose this amount. In this case, this tank is at surface, so they didn't need to do any digging to access this. But again, just a nice picture for what your tank probably looks like underground. Next slide, please. So just to kind of wrap up the presentation and then provide some general care for your septic system, we did address some of these, so I'll just kind of move through the list. Understanding your system's construction and its location is one of the key pieces for you to be a responsible sewage system owner, in order for you to request pump outs, or maybe that light in your basement that you don't know what it is suddenly starts flashing. That's probably your sewage alarm. And that now means you have to figure out where that tank is, how to access the pump, if that alarm is going off, it means that your tank is filling and you could be at risk of sewage coming to ground surface or backing up into your basement or potentially your bathtub. So knowing how your system is constructed and where all the components are will help you in those, let's call them more emergency situations, but also just in general, you know, if you're having landscaping work, don't drive a machine over top of the leaching bed area because that can crush pipes. And then the next point is to keep accurate and up-to-date records on maintenance, pumping, and repairs. Again, to just make sure that you're documenting that information, specifically the pumping. The pump outs, you know what frequency you're having the pump outs, because this program is running and now running every 5 years. If you needed a pump out now in this cycle and you don't pump out again and or you don't pump out until the next cycle comes around in 5 years and you needed another pump out, that's a sign that you maybe likely use your system in a way that needs it to be pumped out less than 5 years. That's not a good or a bad thing. It's very dependent on how much the system is being used. Cleaning products, that's a few down. But just to kind of get an understanding of how can you best help your system function. So then getting tanks routinely pumped out. So the standard kind of estimation is every 3 to 5 years. Identifying and completing effluent filter maintenance. So you may not know that you have a filter if your system or your tank specifically was installed in those kind of 2006, 2007 range or since then, it likely has an effluent filter, which likely means that you need or will mean that you should be opening up that septic tank and cleaning that filter. And then the comment about avoiding putting grease, excessive food scraps, anything like wipes. We know that some wipes are labeled as flushable. That is an unprotected term. That is something that industry is attempting to work on and change and advocating for. But a company can choose to write flushable wipes on a product, and there is nothing that is validating or confirming if it is flushable or not. So be cognizant of that. Even something like toilet paper, the really nice soft toilet paper, as much as you may enjoy it, long means that it has really, soft means that it has really long fibers, and that means that it's harder to break down. So getting that maybe rougher toilet paper or rougher Kleenexes can help save your system because they break down a lot faster and they don't accumulate the solids quite as much. If you do want to test out some of your own kind of tissue and toilet paper products, you can put a little bit in a mason jar with some water and shake it around for a few minutes. If it stays as a solid wipe, it will likely stay like that in your tank and it'll just stay there until a pumper comes and sucks it out. If it breaks apart within 5 minutes of shaking or leave it on the counter for a few hours, that is what will happen in your septic tank. And you can do the same thing if you really like flushable wipes. Do that test for yourself to see if you feel like it should be into your septic tank. Things like paints we see fairly frequently. They just, again, stay in your tank. They can't be broken down. So we generally recommend if you're on a septic system, rinse off your paints into a separate bucket. Don't do it directly into a sink. And then bleach or any sort of stronger chemical. So sewage systems function both on enough time to allow the solids to kind of separate and break down, like we just talked about for toilet paper. But there's also a lot of bacteria, or if you happen to open your tank and see lots of little bugs or worms crawling around potentially, all of those things are breaking down the solid matter that's in your tank. If you add a lot of chemicals into that tank, you are going to start killing those things that are inside that tank. So being cognizant, maybe picking some less harsh or maybe reducing your concentration of chemicals. Sometimes white vinegar or a vinegar is a alternative solution to a bleach in your washing machine to be a softener and a cleaner. And then the last component here we have is keep trees, shrubs, vehicles, and structures away from the system. So anything that is woody, grows really quickly. You mentioned willows, but something like cedars are also pretty classic. You know, you look at a hillside and cedars have somehow found their way to grow on what looks like just rocks. It's because they have a very extensive root network, very small. They can find their way into little cracks. You have that near your sewage system. They are going to work their way towards that nutrient-rich liquid. And then this picture is a leaching bed. So it is kind of sloping down away from the building. There are small woody shrubs on the bed. So this isn't necessarily a concern at this moment because these roots may not be in the piping yet. However, if this were to stay like this and you give these plants 5-10 years, the roots will likely make their way into the pipes and will start causing impacts to the system. So if you happen to know that it's a garden and you planted some nice vegetation there, it might be time to relocate that tree or that shrub. And we'll just flip to the last slide if you can, please. Thank you. So this is just the website, both a QR code if you want to scan it on a phone, or the actual link is there if you received our letter so far. Both the QR code and the link in the same way are written out right on there. But if you just go to the township's website, you should be able to look up the sewage maintenance program. There's also links on the township's Engage webpage. And both of those locations will have a lot of resources, things like the policy if you want to read the background for it, and then a lot of septic care, something called Septic Smart. It's a document that's been around for many years, put together by our Ontario government and a few ministries and industry. And it is intended for homeowners to understand their septic system. So there's lots of pictures and descriptions. It's meant for the common owner who has a sewage system who maybe wants to learn more about it. So there will be some links to that, or you may be able to just Google Septic Smart and open up that document. So that gets us to the end of our discussion. So I think we are flipped over to questions. So maybe this is going back over to Matt.
Excellent, thank you. As discussed earlier, or mentioned earlier, we now have the opportunity to open the floor to any questions that you may have to ask. If there's any questions in-house, I think we're going to give the first question to in-house attendees, and then we will flip online and back and forth and so on. On that microphone there on the top, there's a little toggle to switch on off. If you just push it to on, you should be good to go.
Thank you. That was very interesting and well done presentation on both of your parts. I'm on Skeleton Lake, and it's a seasonal cottage with relatively infrequent use. What I am not aware of there is where the outlet drain is from the tank. So I guess really some digging is required to find that, I would think. I know where the tank drains, or where the tank the inflow is, and we've had it drained, so pumped out on occasion, most recently last year. But the other one, and whether there's a baffle on it on the exit on the effluent side, I have no idea. So I guess partly my question would be, if the leaching bed is dry and there doesn't seem to be any moisture coming out anywhere down below the leaching bed, would it be necessary to expose that exit from the tank?
Just to clarify, sorry, I know you just shut that off, but when you say outlet, do you mean the second lid? Like you only know where one of the lids are? Okay. So the answer would be yes. So we talked about that liquid level height is very important for us to understand how the leaching bed is functioning, but also that's where the gases are really accumulating, is generally on that outlet side. So not only would it be the state of the baffles, most tanks have baffles, it's just whether or not it's a PVC baffle that has an effluent filter in it. But the condition of that chamber, the condition of the lid. So to help find the lids, if you know where one is, if you kind of draw a line from your building to that lid, you can generally keep going in a straight line from that location. And it's generally about 1 to 1.5 meters away from that first lid. And then if you can start digging down there, hopefully you can find it without too much trouble. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you for that question. Ask for Maria to help us out with this next one. If we can toggle to our Zoom attendees and see if there's any questions there. Excellent.
Hello.
Hey there, we can see you and we can hear you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Great informative Zoom meeting. I appreciate being able to do it this way. I have 2 quick questions. How can we find out if there was a permit approval on our tank? And when will we know the level of testing that will be required?
Perfect. That's a simple enough one. You can reach out to me directly, and we can do a record search. You should have my information on there. Again, I'm Matthew, but that letter that you got back in February should have my information on it. If not, I can give you my email address right now. It's
okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yep, first initial, then last name. So MIRVING@muskokalakes.ca. So great question, and a very common one. So if you want to know more about what kind of records the municipality has for your sewage system, don't hesitate to send me an email, and we can certainly do that record search to determine, age, construction, all that good stuff.
Perfect.
And that kind of leads directly into your second one, right? I mean, if it's 30 plus years old, continuing with the last example there, say we're on Skeleton, then it would be deemed high risk.
Well,
if it's
we're on 3 miles, so it's definitely high risk.
okay.
I do believe I can't remember when it was done. My father had it replaced because I do know we had to buy some property off our neighbors to expand the the bed system. So I would expect everything to be on record somewhere. And so I guess, yeah, I'll reach out to you with an email, and then I guess you will be letting us know at some point when the inspections will be taking place.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's perfect. Send me that email and I can do the record search and let you know what we have.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if Paisley has anything to add, but generally 4 to 6 weeks in advance of when Envision is going to do your sign inspection, they will send you some correspondence letting you know exactly that, the date, the proposed time, kind of what to expect, how to prepare, a lot of the stuff that we went over in today's presentation. So again, about 4 to 6 weeks in advance of that inspection, they'll reach out to you directly.
Okay, and I'll hang off on getting it pumped out. This is our pump out year, and it's just seasonal. So yeah, I'll wait until you guys have done it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thank you. And I'm not sure if we have any other in-house questions or not. Yeah, not seeing any other in-house questions. We'll stick with participants attending through Zoom. Excellent. I can see a name on the screen of Jennifer. Thank you for joining us tonight, Jennifer. If you have any questions, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Sorry, took me a little bit to get connected there. I did send an email to one of you and was told that my inspection would take place actually very soon, but I have received no correspondence whatsoever with respect to a date or anything like that. So I can certainly be prepared because I live fairly close here, but I just need some information about time and date and whatnot.
We would have issued out letters either by email or snail mail, let's call it, depending on what information was passed along before. So if your inspection is booked and coming up at this point, we have sent out letters for anyone who's getting inspection in May or June. Then you hopefully receive that correspondence from us. I'm not maybe completely sure on I guess why you think an inspection is coming up right away. Maybe I'm just not sure kind of who you corresponded with, or if the intention was, this summer versus the next 2 weeks or so.
I was under the impression it would be like in the next couple weeks. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I would have to go back to I can't do that right now, but
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, if you were corresponding with us, then please reach back out to us and we can help kind of answer any of those questions. If for some reason you didn't receive the letter or the email, then we can help communicate that or potentially rebook the inspection if it's not a time that can work with yourself. And hopefully we can help clarify that. If you do find out you were talking to Matt, then potentially reach back out to Matt to get that, or maybe wait for us to correspond with you if you haven't gotten anything yet.
okay, I'll reconnect with whoever had sent me an email. Will do. Thank you
Wonderful.
very much.
Thank you.
Now,
Excellent. Thank you for the question. And Maria, I'm not sure if there's anybody else in the lobby attending online that may have a question for us. Okay.
Since there's a pause in the action here, I'm just thinking we drink water out of the lake and it's filtered and everything else. So, but when you do a coliform count on the from the lake, That's not really a good measure of your septic function, is it really? Because that could be wildlife.
That's correct. There are a number of different factors that could attribute to that. Natural decay of material, as you say, wildlife activity, and a myriad of other conditions resulting in that
Yeah.
that test result. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this washout thing, or the morning rush comment, what you want has to have a hose ready, but so you put that down into the tank and then run it through. How do you actually physically do that without getting into the tank?
Yeah, so the hose we will be keeping just above the sewage level, so we don't want hoses entering sewage if we can avoid that. That being said, we have Lysol wipes and other cleaning products that we can use to help clean off the hose. And we don't want it too high up because we don't want sewage to be splashing around. So in order to kind of safely complete this test, the hose will be kind of just above the standard liquid level, turned on and then run throughout that time period. And the test will be under observation so that we can see if the liquid levels are rising. We can kind of shift that hose around if required.
I see. And if the tank had been drained or emptied last summer and the water level is in the tanks low, that's not a big issue.
So a standard septic tank should fill up pretty quickly. So let's say most tanks are 3,600 liters. That's the minimum code size. Let's say a shower, for example. The standard shower length of time roughly equates to 100 liters. So if you kind of take that shower, flushing a toilet could be anywhere between 4 and 20 liters per flush. Washing hands is generally 1 liter. So if you add all of that together and you're trying to get to 3,600 liters, that can happen fairly quick. So if you did have your tank pumped out last year and you've been using the property, even if it's for 8 weekends across the summer, that tank should be back to its operating level. And if it is not, that could just be because of a lot of water conservation and a lack of use of the property, but it could be an indication that sewage is exiting that tank in an alternative way. That could be a crack, or it could be tanks are often in 2 pieces, a bottom half and a top half. If they're a concrete lids or concrete tank specifically, maybe that seal is broken and sewage is able to exit out of that location. So ideally, you open up your lids, your tank should be at what you may think is a full capacity. As long as you're seeing pipes, that's its working level. If it is so full that you're up to the lids, right at the brim, you don't see any pipes, that is too full.
So that would be a kind of an indication if the fluid level was low in that the tank isn't good.
It could be an indication that there is some sort of issue like a crack in the tank. Yeah. And you may see something like a lot of kind of heavy grass growth around the edges of the tank. That could be an indication that sewage is coming out along the sides and the grass is really lush and darker green. That may tell you which side of the tank that crack is.
Right. Is there any point in us in the leaching bed just digging down a bit to see whether it's a sandy soil or just what's down there? Is there any point in that?
Ideally, sewage systems were installed as per the permit and as per their design, which should hopefully mean that soil assessment took place before the sizing was completed for that leaching bed. Because when you determine how many feet or meters or square meters you need for a leaching bed, the 2 main components is the design flow, the expected sewage that's going to enter the tank, which is generally based on square footage, number of fixture units, and bedrooms. And the second component is the soil. So a native soil test should have been completed as part of that initial design. And then during the actual installation, a lot of times material is imported into the property. It may be sand, it may just be that gravel that's around the pipe. So in the context of this program, the cases where we are looking to confirm the soil type is in cases where we don't have any documentation about that soil type, not just necessarily for a standard system. We're kind of leaning back to the point of if everything is indicating that the system is functioning, so your liquid level looks good in your tank, depending on the age, maybe that hydraulic test was done, everything looks good there, the leaching bed isn't showing any signs of stress or failure or breakout. Digging into tanks isn't necessarily a step that we want to be taking to potentially, cause damage to the system if we don't feel like there's a reason for it.
There must be some age at which you get suspicious about a tank. I mean, the cottage, I think, was built in 65, and presumably the tank was put in at the same time, and the leaching bed. So, there must be things have changed in terms of requirements.
For sure. And I think kind of part of what feeds into the risk categorization is the age. And that is acknowledging that as systems spend more time in the ground, they do age and they can deteriorate, specifically the concrete tanks. And so that's, part of the reason why the older systems are part of the high risk category. However, an age is not the only indicator of a well-functioning system. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for those good questions. Maria, not sure if there's any questions online. Any more in-house? Not seeing any. I just want to take the time on behalf of the township and our partners at Envision to thank everybody who watched and participated today. That's great. We will also be posting this information session online to our township website for repeated viewing as soon as practical after today's information session. Alrighty, thank you everybody who participated today.